on behalf of SYFS and the Shrewsbury Coalition for Addiction Prevention and Education, we'd like to thank you for coming out tonight. Thank District Attorney Joe Early's office for providing us with this film, State Representative Hannah Kane for being here to moderate, and the members of Shrewsbury Coalition for Addiction Prevention and Education. If you're in the room, can you stand up for a moment? Any coalition members? They might actually all be out there. There's a couple of you over here. Thank you for all your work and time that you spend making this a safe community and providing these forums to, thanks, to educate our community and to prevent substance use and addiction, particularly among our young people. This is a really important topic that we're covering tonight, and we're doing so not only because of the current party culture that's out there, but also because of the increasing prevalence of mental health problems in young people. And there are so many young people that are taking some of these medications because they need to. So we want to make sure that everybody is very clear about how dangerous mixing these medications with alcohol is. And we're running a little late already, so I'm not going to take up too much time. I'm going to ask Hannah Kane, State Representative Hannah Kane, to come on up and say a few words. So please use the index cards to write down your questions. We'll collect those after the film, but before the discussion, and that's what we'll use to have our panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you for all your work as our head cheerleader and all other things at Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services. Your work is amazing as our executive director. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. As Christine just said, SCAPE has been involved with hosting forums in the fall and the spring, really to educate the Shrewsbury youth and parents and community members as well about some of the harms that are out there. We've all seen a lot of the news reports, but sometimes just getting some really critical, useful information that you can use in your own home can be a challenge. So in April of 2016, we had a forum on the opioid epidemic here held at the high school. And then in the fall of 2016, we had the film If Only, produced by the James Wahlberg of the Mark Wahlberg Youth Foundation. And then in November 2017, Dr. Ruth Pody was here talking about the adolescent brain development and the impact on teen risk-taking and sometimes some poor decision-making. And then last fall, we held an event, Middle Schoolers at Risk, What Every Family Needs to Know, which featured experts discussing addictive behaviors, including vaping, social media, gaming, and marijuana. And I'm going to give you a preview of next fall. SCAPE is working now on putting on a forum for both students and parents and community members as well around marijuana as we see the ramping up of retail sales. Want to make sure that families have information relative to the harm for youth use. So I want to thank Todd Bazidlo for letting us be here at the high school tonight, and also Dr. Lizotte and Dr. Jones in the middle schools for helping us promote this event. We're going to be watching the 30-minute documentary first, and then following that, we will have a panel discussion. I have some questions to get the panel started so that you can be turning in any questions that you have, and then I'll be asking those questions to the panel. The documentary that we're about to see is presented by the Clay Soper Memorial Fund, and it is the effort of the Soper family to educate young people and their loved ones about the harm of combining prescription drugs and alcohol. The Soper family lost their son Clay at the age of 19 when he'd returned home from his freshman year at the University of Denver. And Clay was from Winchester, so this is very close to our home here in Shrewsbury. After the film, the three panelists, Tim Connolly from District Attorney Joe Early's office, Dr. Nandana Kansra, and Jennifer Rifkin of SYFS Clinical Director, will be up here, and we will address the questions that we have to them. We are being taped tonight, this portion and the portion of the panel. The video itself cannot be taped, but I do all want to let you know that this will be replayed, this conversation, on Shrewsbury Media Connection. And I would encourage you, if you have friends or children who couldn't be here tonight, to try and at least make sure that they're able to see the discussion that occurs after. DA Joe Early could not be here today. He had a family issue arise tonight, but Tim Connolly is here on his behalf, And I wanted to have Tim come up and just let you know why District Attorney Joe Early thinks it's so important to be providing this film. It was his office that actually has a copy of this film, is ensuring that families and youth are able to watch it. Tim?
Thank you. I'm not offended if you're disappointed that you're not hearing the district attorney. My mother would be disappointed that District Attorney Early's not here. So, anyway, I just want to say that you're going to see a very eye-opening documentary, If They Had Known. The decision to mix medications such as Xanax and alcohol can have lethal effects. It's not just Xanax either. It's Adderall, Klonopin, Dexedrine, Ritalin, Lunesta, Valium, and more. No place in the world has more prescription drugs waiting to be abused than the typical American medicine cabinet. In our society, pills have become our solution to every problem. They are also a disaster waiting to happen. It doesn't have to be that way. As parents, please keep all prescription drug medications locked up. You need to make sure your children aren't getting into the medicine cabinet and exploring and experimenting. And when you're done with your pills, you need to get rid of them. Your police station has a drop box where you can get rid of unused pills. You also need to be aware and make your children aware of the dangers of underage drinking. It's not just illegal, it can cause long-term damage to a developing brain. Underage drinking is one of the leading risk factors in a person becoming addicted to drugs or alcohol. The younger someone starts, the greater the risk. DA Early is a big proponent of prevention. Prevention works. To that end, our office is providing grants this year to schools to hold safe, alcohol-free, drug-free after prom and after graduation activities, preventing tragedies. We need to continue these efforts. Opioids are our biggest societal problem right now, but depressants like Xanax taken with alcohol can be lethal. Informed minds are our friends. Thank you.
I also want to thank Dr. Joe Sawyer not only for being here, but for, again, promoting the fact that we have this event tonight. I think that Dr. Sawyer's statement in his email from last night saying empowering our children with information about the risks involved with substance use and with their family expectations known, those are crucial factors that influence our young people's decisions. So thank you for being here. I will be back up once we are done the documentary, and remember to be thinking about any questions that you might want to have asked tonight of the panel. Thank you.
Every pump, I would stare into his eyes, and as if we were in a different world together. I couldn't hear anyone's voice around me. It was just me and Clay there. No pulse, no breathing, white. And the only thing I can think of is breathe, breathe, breathe.
$30 racks, beer, liquor, music playing, people having a good time.
It was way too casual of a night for our friend to die.
The hardest part for us to understand is that Clay was in the prime of his life. He was a thriving 19, almost 20-year-old college student. None of his friends who were with him that night had any indication that he was at all in trouble.
I didn't know until the night that I went out with him that people even took Xanax. He said I should never do it, but he ended up taking it.
He thought he knew what he was doing. He thought he knew where his limit was. He thought he knew best.
Taking alcohol alone is one thing. Taking alcohol with another depressant raises the levels of both, and the liver can't manage it, and before you know it, you've taken too much. And that's a potentially lethal combination.
Prior to Clay's death, I didn't know anything about mixing prescription drugs and alcohol.
No one really saw it coming, and I think that's why it's important that it could really happen to any kid.
I will never forget it or underestimate that risk.
We've got to change the culture, but it's like moving a battleship. You can't turn it on a dime. You've got it swinging around so slowly, but you've got to keep at it, and you can turn the ship around.
He loved all of us, and he loved his family so much. He wasn't trying to put any of them at risk, and that's the saddest part.
I don't think I'll ever have someone like Clay Soper ever again. I want Clay to be remembered forever, and I want his spirit to live on.
Pretty darn moving, huh? A reminder, please write some questions down. Christine Mowry's going to come around and collect them. While she's doing that, I'm going to invite the panel up and introduce them. If you all come take a seat. I'd also like to mention that I missed him when he was here for a few minutes. The chair of the Shrewsbury School Committee was here, Jason Palich. He had to leave to get to another event, but I want to thank him for coming tonight as well. There's another microphone over here, or if you guys all want to sit on this side. So our panel tonight, as I mentioned before, Jennifer Rifkin, Dr. Nandana Kansra, and Tim Connolly. Jennifer Rifkin is our social worker who's been working with children, adolescents, and families since 2001, and she's the clinical director at SYFS, where she oversees outpatient clinic and other support services. Prior to her work at SYFS, Jennifer was the director of youth and young adult services for a decade at the Institute for Health and Recovery. Dr. Nandana Kansra, Shrewsbury resident and mom, most importantly, right? And an assistant professor at UMass Medical School since 2007 has been an internist at St. Vincent Physician Services. Nandana has her master's in public health and has led 2 week-long mission trips to Haiti and Guatemala to provide care to vulnerable populations that have little to no access to health care. And she also volunteers at the St. Anne's Clinic in Shrewsbury on Tuesday evenings in Shrewsbury. And Tim Connolly, who is from District Attorney Joe Early's office. He's his Director of Communications, a position he's held for 12 years. Before that, he was in a similar position at the Mass Department of Revenue and had spent 23 years as a reporter and editor at several newspapers, including 9 at the Worcester T&G. So as a reminder, if anyone has any questions, to please be passing them to Christine. She can come around and get them. But I will start us off with a couple questions. Dr. Kansra, I'll start with you. As a doctor, when you're prescribing drugs that may be potentially misused, how do you address this at the time of prescribing with young people and with their families?
Thank you for that question, and thank you for having me. So one of the most important things, when we're prescribing any sort of medication is to make sure that the patient is aware of what they're taking, what is the interaction of that medication with anything else that they might be on, and how long do they actually need to take it. A lot of patients think if the medicine is working for them, it's okay to dial up on the medication without consulting the physician, and that's not right. When I'm talking to my older patients, I always tell them if you're on a prescription medication, which is, let's say, a sedative or a benzo or a muscle relaxant, make sure it's placed in a secure place. Most of the children, about 70% of our teens who use drugs, prescription drugs, get them from family and friends. So it's really important for us as adults to make sure we secure our drugs if any sort of prescription drugs are being used. 2,500 teens will use a prescription drug and abuse a prescription drug every single day. So making sure we're empowering our patients, our teens, and educating them is really the most important.
Thank you. And I think it's important to note here too that Clay wasn't using a drug prescribed to him.
Mm-hmm.
He was using a drug that he got access to. So what advice can you give us if somebody is prescribed a drug in terms of ensuring that it doesn't fall into the hands of someone else in the family or friends?
If you are on a drug, let's say it's a sedative, or let's say it's an ADD medication, remember these are some of the most abused drugs. And children are naturally curious by nature. Make sure you put your drugs in a secure place. If you no longer require the drug, bring it back to your doctor's office, or you can take it to the police station where it can have a safe drop-off. Do not flush the drugs down the toilet. Make sure you teach the children that the side effects of the drugs and what can happen with potential misuse of these drugs. As it was mentioned in the movie, Clay had access to Xanax, and I don't know if you saw the dose, it was 1 milligram of Xanax. Klonopin, Xanax, Concerta, Ritalin, muscle relaxants, Lunesta, Ambien, these drugs are around all of us. And at certain points in our life, I can understand the need for these drugs, but making sure that our children are educated and we are securing our drugs is really important.
So one of the questions, and perhaps Tim, you can answer part of this question, and actually I might ask Dr. Sawyer or Todd Bizidlo, if he's here, to answer this question, or perhaps Noel Freeman, she's still here. Noel, are you here? You could answer this. A concern by a number of parents that every child in Shrewsbury Public Schools, middle school and above, should see this video. And what are the opportunities to ensure that every child here has an opportunity to see this and understand the impact of mixing prescription drugs or any drug and alcohol? Any of you who wants to answer this question would. So I think that's part of it, right, is showing the kids the video, but I think there's the other part of perhaps them seeing it together and understanding the real consequence of it. And so I'm not sure if it's a part of the health curriculum, if there's an opportunity there. Dr. Jones, anyone? Yeah, Dr. Lazat. Sure.
But certainly any educational, whether it's a video or a guest speaker coming in, a teacher teaching students the users, all of those things combined with a real, education at home from parents and grandparents and siblings, and it's a community. Again, it's a community issue that needs to be dealt with
And Tim, do you think that this is something that could be made available again through the DA's office for
Absolutely.
us?
Absolutely. Right now, we're sort of trying to get it out to everybody in the 60 cities and towns that fall under District Attorney Early's district. And I'm sure that we could bring it back to Shrewsbury, or anybody who's here from another town who would want us to bring it to their community. I'm sure we would be happy to.
Great. Jennifer, I'll direct this to you. The question is, don't you think if we paid more attention to the mental health of young adults, the drug and alcohol problem would be not as severe?
Yes. Whoever suggested that question, I think certainly there's a ton of data that would tell us that mental health and substance use are often co-occurring issues. I can tell you within the Massachusetts youth substance use treatment system, 90% of youth have a mental health indicator along with their substance use disorder. So I think there is, without a doubt, addressing mental health issues earlier, more directly, more effectively, we can certainly decrease some of the substance use issues. Again, there's a ton of data out there that says kids are using substances for self-medication purposes. So if we can teach folks other ways to manage anxiety, other ways to cope with depression, and that could certainly include referrals for therapy. It can include mindfulness training. It can include encouraging kids to get out and exercise, whatever it may be. Addressing their mental health issues more directly can certainly have a positive effect on substance use.
And I think, one concern is that you could have a takeaway from this film that the issue is really about mixing, but the reality is even doing one when you're underage, and according to what we know about the way brain development's now, even under the age of 25 can be risky, but the legal age is 21. So what message do you have relative to, especially for our people under 21 here, around use of any of these things on their own?
So again, there's a lot of research that will tell us that the earlier you start using, the greater chance you have of developing an addiction later in life. I can tell you if you get up to the age of 21 without using a substance, your chance of developing an addiction is about 2%. It's pretty low. I think the psychiatrist who is on there on the film sort of showed a little bit with the brain development why this is the case. When you're young, and probably Dr. Conser, you can speak to this better than I can, but I know that when you're younger, that connection between the emotional center of your brain and the prefrontal cortex where you're making your decisions, it's just not there yet in the way that it is with adults. And it makes your brain much more vulnerable to developing addiction. So avoiding substance use when you're young is really important to keep your brain healthy. I don't know if you want to speak to the neuroscience behind this better than I can.
You're absolutely right. Our brain is most vulnerable between the ages of 14 to 24. That's the time when the brain is still developing and the neuronal connections are still being established. And the impulse control centers are not fully mature at that time. So these youth are at really high risk. And not just the impulse control centers, but any child or any teen who uses drugs at that age is more at risk down the road for alcohol, for prescription drug use, and even for some anxiety, psychosis, and all sorts of mental health disorders that we are seeing as more and more data is coming out. So it's really important to protect our youth at this age.
So a question that went along with this as well is, how do you get teens to listen to the warnings and understand these risks? I'll let you guys answer this, but I think the number one takeaway is if you brought your young people with you tonight, that's fantastic. But because of the way the brain develops and the impulse piece of it, you have to remind them every single time they leave your site, if they're going out, to not be partaking in these types of behaviors. It's not checking a box tonight by being here and thinking, great, I'm covered now, they got it. Even if they're the smartest kid in the world, there's too much other stuff going on that in a moment they can make a different decision. So the more that I think we as parents or people who are impacting their decision-making process reiterate it constantly, even though it's annoying and they'll hate us for it, it can make a difference in terms of their choice that evening on what they do. But is there anything else that you recommend in terms of helping break through that teenage mind at the moment?
Well, certainly talking about it, like you said, all the time, early, often, all of that good stuff, that's important. Parents matter. I say this all the time. Parents matter. Kids, as much as they may get frustrated with parents, particularly when they're in their adolescent years, they still listen to you guys because you raised them and they love you and you love them, and they know that you have, or they know that you have their best interests at heart. The other piece is to be really clear about your expectations. There's a ton of research that would tell us that the more clear we as parents are with our expectations around alcohol use, around drug use are with our kids, the greater outcome they're going to have in terms of not using substances. We have to be really, really clear. We have to role model appropriate behavior as well as parents, and that's something that adults don't always love hearing, but role modeling appropriate, safe use of substances is also critical.
May I just add to that? The other thing I'd just like to add is that we have to understand that party culture doesn't always have to be drugs and alcohol, and that's something we as parents and as for our teens, we need to educate them. They can have a party without having to get involved, with the ping pong into the beer bottles and having to drink that stuff out. I mean, we don't have to do Beru every time. And that's something that we have to enforce, that you can have a party, but you don't have to get sloshed. And that constant reinforcement is, I think, really important.
So it's okay to play beer pong with water.
Or a soft drink.
So there's a question on responsibility and who can be held responsible for Clay's death. And that is one of the questions that we had prepared tonight already, because there are social hosting laws which are really important as parents and adults to know. So Tim, can you educate us a little bit? And it's not just on alcohol, we also have the same laws for marijuana as well.
Well, Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 138, Section 34, covers social hosting. And if you furnish alcohol to a person under the age of 21, you can be fined up to $2,000 and you can be imprisoned for up to a year. When the furnish, as the legislature does, they have words in their laws that say certain things, but furnish really means supply, give, provide, allow people underage to possess alcohol on your property. And your property also includes if you're renting a hall somewhere or you're renting a room in a hotel. It's all covered. So you could be liable for that if kids get drunk. You can also get sued if someone at that party gets drunk and then goes out and hurts someone else. So there's a lot of replications for allowing kids to drink on your premises or at your house.
And so I think too, sometimes it's hard as a parent to have this conversation with your kids about where they're going and what they're doing, but it's also a conversation we as adults can have with other parents if our children are going to their house, to really understand, are they going to be home, sort of what is out at their house that kids might get into. A lot of times kids who have older siblings or siblings at college who have a fake ID then become the supplier when they're home for the summer for the younger kids. So again, I think it's one of those conversations you sort of continually have to have with your kids, and especially if you have a kid who is off at college, not only for themselves when they come home, but making sure, we saw in this film that Clay was looking out for his younger brother Ted and knowing that he shouldn't be doing something that he was doing, yet he still made the decision that he did, which ended his own life. And so I think making sure a lot of parents aren't necessarily aware that if you allow kids to come over and you think, well, it's fine, they're here, they're not driving around, they're in the basement, I'd rather have them drink at home. It doesn't mean something bad's not gonna happen, and it doesn't mean that you won't be responsible for it. So it's an important message as parents for us to remember. There was a question about how pervasive is vaping at the high school level and at the middle school level. Would you like to address that, Jennifer?
So I don't have any data on that. Anecdotally, very. I would say it's a significant issue. Again, I don't have actual data on it, but I've heard that this is a very, very, very pervasive issue. I know that I just heard that I think the principal of the high school is looking into a potential anti-vaping program, which is a fantastic idea. That's something that we can also just, so folks are aware, we have a training that we wrote up around just the dangers of vaping. It's really geared more towards middle school students, but that's something that we can offer because it is a very serious issue.
And just if you're not aware, the nicotine that is supplied in a vaping is about the equivalent of a carton of cigarettes. And it is very addictive and has very harmful consequences to brain development. It's not just a lung issue. And it's also, kids can be addicted to it and have withdrawal symptoms when they try and stop. It can be very, very difficult for them to stop and to break doing that. And kids can do this without anyone knowing. It is completely easy, and it happens all the time for kids to vape, and you will have no idea that they're vaping. You could even look in their purse and think, oh, there's nothing in here, they're fine. I can assure you that the items that they can use for vaping go undetected by all of us. So the hidden in plain sight display was out there. I don't know, Christine, is it still out there? Is it? That helps you see what are some of the ways in which it's so easy for kids to hide the elements that they can use for vaping. And they can do it on a bus, in the bathroom, in a classroom, in your car while you're driving, and you won't know they're doing it. So I would encourage you to have that conversation with your children. And also, it's very easy now to even go on the internet and find out information that you can use in your own home about really the consequences of vaping and what's in there to illustrate to your kids. Because the majority of them think they're just vaping water and there's really nothing in it. It's not even water, it's oil that they're vaping with high amounts of nicotine in it. So I think hopefully we'll be doing more on that. We did have it as part of our last forum, but it's something that is extremely pervasive, not just in Shrewsbury. We know it's all across the Commonwealth right now. It's a real health problem for us.
And I think I'd just like to add that the way they're marketing this to our kids is because they're flavored. You know, it's apple flavor and it's got bubblegum flavor. So it's very easy for the child to accept something. And the nicotine is just hidden in there. And while there's no smoke, so it's very hard for the parents to realize that there's something that the child may be doing. And because it looks like a USB device, it's very hard. It's basically hidden in plain sight. So having this conversation is so important. And because the water vapor goes so deep into your lungs, there's not just nicotine, but there's other harmful chemicals. There's acrolein, there's formaldehyde. These are chemicals that are causing cancers, and we're seeing more and more data coming out about it. So vaping is a lot more dangerous than it actually looks. So, you know, it's just something we just need to keep talking about.
So one of the concerns for our young people, right, is what if you're out and you're at a party and you know you shouldn't be doing some of these things, but you see your friends doing it, or you're getting peer pressure to do it. What is some advice for young people in terms of how to deal with that, especially in a culture where there's a lot of pressure to do everything, including, you know, to act right when you're with your friends?
So I think there are a whole host of options depending on your comfort level. Certainly, you can always fill a solo cup with water, and you can drink the water and just not tell anyone that you're drinking substances. That's something that, or not telling anyone that you're not drinking beer. That's something that a lot of folks that I've worked with over the course of the years have felt really comfortable doing. You can also be pretty upfront about it. No, not for me. I went to this really intense film the other day. Kid died mixing alcohol and benzos. That's just not for me. Hopefully it's not for you guys too in the party, but you know, this is not for me. So that's something that you could also just be confident in your answer. Sometimes that's harder again for some kids than others. Again, most of the folks that I've worked with have really liked the just water in the cup idea. Something else you can do is to always just encourage if you're maybe not at the party at the time, but if you're worried about one of your friends, have your friend call their PCP, their pediatrician. Just talk with their pediatrician. She's not here tonight because I know she had a conflict, but Mrs. Rice, the adjustment counselor, she's usually on our, involved in SCAPE. So she's going to know a lot about what some of the specific dangers around mixing alcohol and substance use are. Go talk to your school adjustment counselor. Go talk to any trusted adult if you're concerned about a friend or if you're concerned about yourself. It could even be your parents. Sometimes parents are really open to hearing about their kids' problems. It's an amazing thing. It's very unsafe, and I think people just need to make sure they're aware of that. Kids need to be clear about it, and to either get help from themselves or try and work with a friend to get some support for that friend. Again, you can always reach out to me directly. I will send you all kinds of information that you can give out, whatever it is that's going to feel comfortable to you, but don't just ignore it.
And so I think, one of the things my parents used to tell me when I was going out was, if you're in a situation and it's the wrong situation, even if you've been drinking or doing something you shouldn't have been doing, you can call us and we'll come get you, and it's no harm, no foul. It's the right decision to call, like, no matter what's. And so, clearly I made it through my high school years with that guidance. Is that something that you think is a positive way for a parent? Because it's really hard to tell your kids not to do something, and then if they're doing it, reaching back out and saying, okay, I did it, but I know I shouldn't be. So what guidance can you give us as parents around how to make sure our kids feel comfortable coming to us even if they've made a poor choice?
I think certainly saying, I will absolutely, no questions asked, without a doubt, come and pick you up at 11 o'clock at night, at 3 o'clock in the morning, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, whatever it is. If you need help, I will drop everything to come get you. That is a very important message. It doesn't mean you don't address what happened. I think it's actually critically important to address what happened, and if there needs to be consequences, there needs to be consequences, but the message that your life is more important than anything else that's going on, that's a very, very clear message that has to be sent at all times.
So another question on the medical side of things was, are there drugs that can be prescribed to your child that you may not have gotten a clear warning from your physician, pediatrician, whatever, about the consequences? Like, parents here tonight, if your children are taking something that they've been prescribed, is it appropriate to call a medical person who prescribed it and have a conversation again about, look, I just want to be clear, like, how would this impact if alcohol or drugs or mixing with other things?
Absolutely. Anytime you have a question, call your physician's office, call the provider who prescribed the medication for you. So I was actually looking into, what are the drugs that teens are using, or what are the medicines that are being prescribed more often? And it's actually the ADD medication, Ritalin, Concerta. These are the medicines that are on rise. And what a lot of our teens do is, to take the edge off, they will have a glass of beer, a glass of wine or a cup of beer or whatever. And what it does is it can actually cause lethal arrhythmias with the heart. It can cause a heart attack, it can cause a stroke, but they are not aware of that. But if your physician or your healthcare provider tells you that, then you can guide your child or your teen. So having that conversation and just being aware of what the dangers are is really important. And the same thing can happen with something as simple as Flexeril. So many soccer injuries, and you prescribed maybe a tablet of Vicodin or Flexeril just to take the pain or the edge off. And if you combine that with alcohol, it sends a message to your brain to slow down the breathing. It suppresses your gag reflex. So a child or a teen who's drinking and doing this prescription drug can actually aspirate on their own vomit, stop breathing, and go into a coma. We actually had a very sad case of a teen who had a GPA of 4.8, an all-star athlete, did prescription drugs, did alcohol, went into anoxic brain injury, did not die, but now is a quadriplegic at the age of 21. And there's nothing worse than, having that to deal with for the rest of your life. So have that conversation. Feel free to call your provider any time of the day or night and have that conversation, please.
I would also encourage parents, if your kids are getting prescribed these psychotropic meds that can have really significant effects, particularly when mixed with alcohol, lock those meds up. It doesn't have to be your child that's responsible for the Ritalin or the Xanax. It's okay to dose that out yourself as parents. That's a conversation I've had with many parents. Obviously, I'm not prescribing anything, but if I know a kid is on it, I will certainly talk to the parents about locking that medication up.
Tim, one of the things that we've seen is the increase in fentanyl coming into Massachusetts, and one of the things that I think a lot of people are unaware, not only is the potency of fentanyl, but the ability to cut it with any drug that's out there. So it's not just an issue if you're taking heroin. You could be smoking marijuana, smoking a joint, and it could be cut with fentanyl and it could kill you. So can you maybe just give us a little idea about the prevalence of that now coming into Worcester County and what we're seeing in terms of that being mixed with other drugs?
It does seem as though fentanyl is being used everywhere. It's almost like, those hot sauces, put a little hot sauce on everything, and it just seems like it's showing up in just about everything that's sold on the street. And it's concerning, and the legislature did pass a law about trafficking in fentanyl. But it's difficult for the person who's buying the drugs, because there's no quality control out there when you're buying drugs on the street. Most of the time it just looks like whatever drug you're buying. It looks like cocaine, it looks like heroin, but the fentanyl's in there. So it's very difficult for the person to understand that they're getting a much more powerful drug than whatever they're buying, because this fentanyl is it's brutal. And so many of the overdoses, either fatal or non-fatal overdoses, can be tied back to fentanyl.
And if something is laced with fentanyl and your child uses it and there isn't Narcan right there, the chances of them surviving it are not high.
Not good.
So one of the other things you can do as parents is you can also have on hand in your household Narcan. You may think you will never need it, but it is worth having access to, because at the moment, if there was somebody else who was at your house and needed it, if there was an issue, there's no time to go get it at Target. There's probably no time for the police to get there with it. And police in Shrewsbury now have, starting this year, do carry it on all cruisers. If they're the first to arrive, certainly the fire department, the ambulance, they have it when they arrive. But if fentanyl is part of it, there's not time for it.
And it's free at the pharmacy. You can just go to the pharmacy and ask for for Narcan, and they will give it to you. So it's available to everybody.
So I think we've covered in some way all of the questions that came up here. I think one remaining one sort of goes back to the sort of culture where it is today, and that's a really broad topic. But I think that is something that hopefully in health curriculum and here at the school, we can address more and more some of what kids are being exposed to out there. But there's only so much kids can learn in a health class, and so a lot of this does also come back to us as parents and as members of the community. So we will continue to hold forums like this to help educate people. As you've seen, this room wasn't packed tonight. There's a good showing, and that's great, but there's so many more people who need to hear this message. So we will hopefully be able to host this type of an event again, and certainly you can help, I think, recruit people to come to it and stress the importance of it. But this is something that we as a community have to address together, sort of in all points of life. Are there any questions out there that people didn't write down, but as a part of just the conversation that have come up since we collected the sheets? Yep.
Cases have been brought against parents who weren't home. I don't know the outcomes of those cases off the top of my head, but it is certainly something that, you know, you could end up getting in trouble on.
And really, no one can stop another family from suing you as well. So there's sort of what you're legally responsible for in the law in terms of it, and then there is the civil liability piece. And so I would say that for all intents and purposes, if it's happening in the area that you own or you control, it's on you as well, which is a big challenge for all of us. Yeah. They don't, in the lobby, have the drop box. We do have the collections several times a year. Hopefully when the police station gets redone in a few years, we'll have it. There's an issue of capacity there, unless they've changed something that I'm unaware of, but. Yep. Yep, and we will, and we do promote it when the take-back days occur, and they shockingly still get an enormous amount of drugs that come in on the drug take-back days. But we will certainly continue to promote them, but CVS is a great option as well. Yeah. Do you know, Nandana?
I simply don't know the answer to that. Do you?
I think they are developing some tests, but I'm not sure if they are available.
I do believe, I have a friend who's,
Get them on Amazon.
yeah.
You get nicotine tests, urine tests on Amazon. They're like $10 for a pack of 10.
Yep.
They're pretty accurate.
They are.
It's just like a pregnancy test. It's just like that, same thing, but it's for nicotine specifically.
And there is not yet today an accepted immediate detection of marijuana that's admissible in court, which is why we have a problem with the drug to driving in terms of pulling someone over and being able to uphold it in court. But that's being worked on. But marijuana does stay in the fat cells of your body for 30 days. And so one of the things I tell kids too is, it's not like you can go to a party and have a drink, and if your parents are gone for 24 hours, you can sober up and they'll never know. They won't be able to tell afterwards that you did something. If something goes south and they have used marijuana, that is something that does show up in a test. It's not admissible in court right now, but it's certainly, if there's an episode, if they go to the hospital, if there's an issue, they can tell that there too. So it is not something that is simply you use it and it's gone and you can't tell 24 hours later that they ever partook in it.
I'd just like to add a word about the edibles with the marijuana. The absorption of those is very haphazard. So what can happen is somebody can try taking a few gummy bears and another few gummy bears and they're not getting a high, then they're drinking alcohol, and then suddenly it absorbs and then it hits them. We actually had somebody jump off the 4th floor of a building because it suddenly hit them, and that was the end of them. So, the absorption of these drugs is very, very irregular, and that's something we need to be aware of.
And it's also a note to remind your kids, if they're out at a party, they wouldn't know if those are gummy bears, the normal ones that you buy at the store, or laced with marijuana. They can't tell visually looking at them, so they need to be really clear when they're eating anything. Any food product, anything can be laced with marijuana, and you can't tell the difference between something that isn't and something that is. And so to make sure, and as Nandana said, it takes the body anywhere between 20 minutes and 2 hours before it absorbs it and you start to feel the full effects of edibles. And so it's not the same as somebody smoking a joint and you sort of instantly get high. So a lot of people think they're fine, they took something, didn't impact them at all, and then they're driving or they're doing something else, and all of a sudden the impairment begins to take effect, and they're not in a good situation. Any other questions? Yep. The issue is, right, so there isn't something like a breathalyzer. There's no roadside immediate test to tell impairment. They have drug recognition experts who can put you through different tests that can help them certainly decide. Some states, it's a blood test and there's a certain level that they look for. One of the challenges is that it impacts people differently. It's not as clear-cut as alcohol is in terms of a percent and impairment. But they are working, there's a whole industry working to come up with a test that not only will be easy to use to detect impairment, but that the courts will uphold when they're before them. Right now, we are missing that element. It's very difficult. Tim, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is going on in Massachusetts anyway is breathalyzers have been thrown out in a lot of cases for quite several years now. So most of the drunk driving cases are proven only on field sobriety tests. And marijuana's done the same way. That if a person's affected by marijuana, they put them through some tests on the side of the road, and that's how they decide whether to arrest them for, OUI drugs. So, it's still, like the representative said, still working on getting the test that's going to really tell you for certain, and we're also working on getting our breathalyzers back so that they're calibrated properly and are accurate.
Anything else? Thank you all so much for coming tonight. We really appreciate it, and hopefully you learned some valuable information.